Ryan Coogler just came off what might be the most acclaimed film of his career. Sinners swept through awards season, racked up 16 Oscar nominations, and now, right as all that dust is settling, Coogler has made it unambiguous. Black Panther 3 is next. Not someday, not eventually. Next, he confirmed it himself on stage at Deadline's Contenders film event in Los Angeles, and his exact words were the kind of statement that shuts down all the speculation at once. He said they're working on it hard, and that it is the next movie. And the thing is, the groundwork for this was already being laid well before that confirmation. It actually started in November 2024, when Denzel Washington, in the middle of a press tour for Gladiator 2, talking to an Australian morning show, casually dropped that Coogler was writing a part specifically for him in the next Black Panther. Casually, like he was mentioning weekend plans, the internet predictably lost its mind. Then by June, Coogler went on Carmelo Anthony's podcast and made it official. He said Washington was family at this point, that he'd been trying to work with him since day one of his career, and that in his view, Washington is the greatest living actor. That's not how you talk about a cameo, that's how you talk about a cornerstone. What makes this casting feel genuinely historic is the context around it. Washington has never been in a superhero movie, not once. In an era where seemingly every major Hollywood actor eventually ends up in some corner of the MCU or the DCU or whatever Sony is doing that week, he held out. And now his MCU debut is being written specifically for him by one of the most thoughtful filmmakers working in the genre today. On top of that, Washington has been remarkably open about the fact that this is among his final acting projects. After Black Panther 3, he plans to do Othello, then King Lear, and then he's talked about stepping back from film entirely, so the weight of his involvement here is hard to overstate. This isn't a veteran actor padding his filmography. This is a legend making a deliberate choice about how he wants to close out his career. Black Panther 3 would arrive after both Avengers Doomsday and Secret Wars, slated for December 2027. That means it lands at the very beginning of Phase 7, the first era of the MCU after the multiverse saga wraps up. Marvel doesn't slot a shaky franchise into that position. They slot something they believe in. Putting Coogler and Wakanda as the first major solo film post-Secret Wars is a statement. It's Marvel saying loudly that this is the new anchor. There's even a rumored title floating around now. A listing in the Film and Television Industry Alliance referenced the film as Shadows of Wakanda and described it as a story exploring Wakanda's vulnerability in the aftermath of T'Challa's death, with Shuri stepping up. Marvel hasn't confirmed that title, and production titles change constantly, but the thematic description aligns exactly with where Coogler has been steering this franchise. Now let's talk about where things actually stand story-wise, because Wakanda Forever left the board set in a very specific way. Shuri took up the mantle of Black Panther. M'Baku stepped forward to challenge for the throne. And then, in one of the best post-credit scenes the MCU has done in years, Nakia brought Shuri to Haiti and introduced her to Toussaint, T'Challa's son, who had been living away from Wakanda specifically to protect him from the weight of the crown. That scene wasn't just emotional, it was a setup. The whole trajectory of the Wakandan succession got reframed in about 3 minutes. Coogler has been consistent in interviews that Shuri is not stepping down going into the next chapter. She's still Black Panther, M'Baku is still king, and Toussaint, T'Challa's son, is still young. Too young to be a central figure in Doomsday, where both Wright and Duke are confirmed to appear. But by the time Black Panther 3 arrives after Secret Wars, Toussaint's age becomes much more interesting narratively. A coming-of-age arc for a prince who never knew his father but carries his legacy. That writes itself, and it tracks with everything Coogler has said about wanting to honor what came before, rather than erase it. The more compelling piece of the puzzle right now, though, is Damson Idris. Casting rumors have pointed to the Snowfall star as possibly playing the next Black Panther, and while nothing has been officially confirmed, Idris was spotted at a public event alongside Angela Bassett, who played Queen Ramonda in the franchise, where Bassett was dressed as the character. That's not nothing. That's the kind of thing Marvel's inner circle doesn't let happen by accident, and Idris himself went through a stretch where he was openly joking about Black Panther in interviews, then went completely quiet on the subject. Anyone who has followed Marvel's casting process for any length of time knows exactly what that silence means. NDAs get signed, conversations stop, and then eventually Marvel makes an announcement on their own timeline. The key framing around Idris, based on everything currently circulating, is the word variant. The multiverse framework that Marvel has been building since at least Endgame makes it entirely workable to introduce a version of T'Challa from another timeline without retconning anything that happened in the first 2 films. By the time Doomsday and Secret Secret Wars have run their course, the concept of multiple versions of the same character coexisting will be completely normalized for audiences. Idris coming in as a T'Challa variant, potentially introduced during Doomsday so audiences can gauge the reaction before Marvel commits to a full solo film, is low risk and exactly the kind of methodical approach the studio has been taking with its biggest swings lately. My read on the actual structure of Black Panther 3 is that it won't be a simple swap. Coogler is too precise a storyteller to just pull the old hero out and plug in a new one. What feels far more likely, based on his sensibility and the arcs he's been building, is that this film functions as a passing of the torch story, one where Shuri's journey reaches a genuine conclusion or pivot point, where T'Challa's legacy gets honored through both his son and potentially through a variant version of him, and where the political tension between the Wakandan throne and the outside world gets a definitive Act 3. That layered approach is the only version of this story that justifies the patience Marvel has shown in letting Coogler develop it properly. Delroy Lindo, who delivered one of the best performances in Sinners and earned an Oscar nomination for it, has also expressed his desire to reunite with Coogler in Black Panther 3. Lindo told reporters that he made his interest known to the director, and that Coogler responded by saying he would only offer him a role if it was genuinely worth his time. That conversation is very telling. Coogler isn't filling out a roster, he's curating a cast the same way he always has, looking for the exact right person for each role and building around emotional and dramatic fit rather than just star power. But speaking of star power, Denzel Washington's involvement carries a dimension that goes beyond the plot mechanics of whatever role he ends up playing. Most people who followed the original Black Panther closely know this story, but it bears repeating because it reframes everything about his presence in this franchise. Washington personally paid for Chadwick Boseman's acting training at the British American Drama Academy when Boseman was a young student who couldn't afford it. Boseman didn't find out who had covered his costs until years later. Washington and Boseman never made a film together, and now Washington is joining the franchise that Boseman built. Whatever Coogler is doing with that relationship thematically, whether it's explicit in the story or simply lives in the subtext, it's going to hit on a completely different frequency than any other MCU casting has ever hit. A February 2028 release is currently the leading projection, and Marvel has reserved multiple slots that the film could occupy. The most likely scenario, based on how Marvel tends to schedule things, is that Shadows of Wakanda opens the year that Avengers: Secret Wars closes out 2027, giving audiences a reset point and a reason to lean into the next era rather than mourn the end of the previous one. The broader picture of what Coogler is building here is genuinely exciting for anyone who cares about where this franchise goes. The MCU had some real stumbles in phases 4 and 5. That's not a controversial take at this point, and even people inside Marvel have acknowledged it. But the approach to Black Panther 3 looks nothing like those stumbles. Coogler himself has said he is fired up about the movie, and that's not just PR speak. This is someone who pushed through the grief of losing Boseman to make Wakanda forever, who called it unfinishable at points, and who came out the other side saying he could do this for the rest of his life. That's the energy you want behind a film that's supposed to rebuild confidence in the MCU's future. Between Shuri, M'Baku, Namor, Nakia, Toussaint, a potential Damson Idris variant T'Challa, Denzel Washington in a custom-written role, possibly Delroy Lindo, and the looming question of whether Michael B. Jordan's Killmonger finds a way back into the picture through the multiverse, Black Panther 3 is shaping up to be the densest, most ambitious entry in a franchise that already had the MCU's highest bar for emotional storytelling. Coogler isn't rushing it, Marvel isn't rushing it, and after everything the MCU has been through over the last few years, that patience might be the most encouraging thing about all of this.